So we're back again, another A2A Roundtable, and today we have Danielle Berman coming onto the show with us. As I'm stumbling over my words completely, it's okay because we can just roll right through it. Now Danielle is from Tackle What's Next, and I'm really intrigued to hear about this. You guys did a what was it, a IG live the other day, and I listened to that, which was really cool. So I'm intrigued to hear a little bit more. So Danielle, why don't you take it away? Tell us about Tackle What's Next. Tell us, where you're from. Give us kind of an intro about you.
Yeah, well, thanks Ryan and Reed for having me on. This is exciting. Reed and I just did an IG live 2 days ago, so good to see you again, Reed, and appreciate you doing
Likewise.
that. Yeah, but yeah, Tackle What's Next. I created Tackle What's Next really not planned, but really out of a need that I saw in the sports industry for athletes to have support, education, and just conversations around what happens when you graduate, you retire, you leave your sport. But really how I got into this is I worked for an athlete out of college. I interned for a former athlete who really saw sports as like a stepping stone to his next chapter. He did not really wrap himself up as this athlete identity, and I saw like how that benefited him. I don't think it was intentional. But then he had a lot of teammates that played sports a lot longer, did not have that same mentality, and they really struggled. And so that just stayed with me throughout my career. I was working in sports, I was working out of sports, I was consulting, doing a lot of events. And I thought, why don't we just bring athletes together to have conversations about this and educate people, educate younger athletes, educate business leaders, educate people in the industry around the challenges, but also the opportunities. And so we did a couple events at Super Bowl in 2020 pre-COVID and one in DC right before that. Obviously, events kind of went by the wayside and went all virtual after that. So we pivoted to that. But really, it was like at those events where people were like, what else are you doing? What other kind of content do you have? Like, how else can I get involved? How can I help? And I just saw like there aren't a lot of people talking about this. And I think even in the last 2 years, that's changed so significantly with content like this. And I think just like things that a lot of people, including you guys, are doing to have these real conversations around what it is, what's going on. But that's really the point of Tackle What's Next, is that we talk about that next chapter. We talk about the good, we talk about the bad, we talk about the ugly, with the goal to say, like, you can get through this. You just have to really put that mindset towards, that you are more than an athlete, that there's a lot more coming down the pipe for you than what you're doing right now, even though it probably doesn't feel like it and it's probably still going to suck going through it. Like, knowing that there's people here that have gone through this and that feel the same way as you do and made it to the other side and probably are still working on themselves but feeling a lot more confident. That's really our goal, is to kind of change that narrative around what that transition is like for so many young people, and also just make it so that we don't need to exist anymore. Like, everyone already feels this way and they're moving forward and like, I'm good, I'm not just an athlete. That's kind of our goal. So, long-winded answer, but that's who I am, what I'm doing, and what Tackle What's Next is all about.
I love it. I think it's incredible. And, one of the questions I had for you was, did you, with creating Tackle What's Next, do you have kind of like a mental health outlook on it? Because, as a former athlete, when you get out of competition, you're always thinking, what am I going to do? I have no idea. And it has like there's a mental health aspect of that. Was that one of the objectives, or was that something that kind of came about as mental health became more of a prominent topic?
It's such a good question, because I think even 2 years ago, we weren't talking about mental health the way we are today, which I think is a good change. And I think that the idea that we always talked about was that identity, right? Who are you? Like, what does athlete have to do with who you are? Because the idea is like, athlete is just a job that you do. It's like being a lawyer or a doctor or whatever. It's a part of your identity, right? It's a part of the things that you do every day and what makes you who you are. But, you know, there's so much more. And I think that's how we really covered it at first, was that identity and that loss of identity that we saw so many people experiencing and not necessarily talking about. And I think as we dug into those conversations, simultaneously mental health was becoming an okay word to use without people just saying, I'm not talking about that. You can't get me to come on an event or a show to talk about my mental health. Like, no. So we started to see that break down a little bit, and we were able to start doing mental health discussions. We threw an event last spring around mental health, and it was called the Identity and Mental Health Summit. And we had people come, and we had attendees say, like, this is the first event I've attended that like is called mental health as an athlete. Like, I've never felt comfortable coming to this before. Now I feel like I need to. And I think that's not just us, that's changing of the times. But I think it's allowed us to have a more open conversation about it. And now it's something we make sure is covered in all of our conversations. We had an entrepreneurship summit in the fall, and one of our panels was about how do you manage your mental health as an entrepreneur, right? You guys know, like, it's tough to run your own thing and to build your own thing and try to keep everything going in your life at the same time. So I think for us, it's a part of all of these transitions in life is your mental health, and you have to take care of yourself. And so it's kind of a combination, but I think we're always talking about it. Now we can label it and use that term without turning people away, I think, for the most part, which has been really nice.
Well, that's great. And, I know that there's a lot of athletes, and we also have an athlete story series where I make it a point to talk to the athletes, former athletes about, how they felt after they were no longer athletes, and what that mental health side of it was. But with you, you're working with them in a different capacity than we are, obviously. What's some of the things that you saw early on that you really like the growth of when it comes to athletes transitioning from being an athlete to just being an adult that's no longer competing?
What a great question. I think there's still so much more room for improvement here. But I think that the positive side is, as horrible as COVID has been, and as horrible as these last 2 years have been for so many people, I do think it was a wake up call, especially for athletes in many sports, realizing that sport is not essential, and that if something crazy happens, like, your sport is not always going to be there. And I think that was kind of I don't want to say a foreshadowing, but it kind of gave a lot of folks that glimpse of like, what am I going to do in 5, 10, whatever number of years, 1 year, when I can't play my sport every day anymore as my day job, if that makes sense. And so I think we've seen a big shift. But I think we've also just seen so many more athletes be more curious and open minded about this. I think we're still seeing a lot of roadblocks though, because I think one of the best things I've seen, to answer your question, is that people are asking more questions. They are meeting more people. They are trying to build relationships and get involved with things that they might need. Um, I think we have a lack of support from some of the institutions and the administrations and things that these athletes are playing for and working for,
Hmm.
because it's still seen as this distraction. It's seen as this, like, you're taking energy away from your sport and putting it into something else. Even though studies are coming out and starting to say, like, you actually play better if you have something else to spend your time on, you have an outlet that's not sports related, if you have a circle that's not sports related. We're not there yet, but I think so many more athletes have been taking it upon themselves to do this digging and to do this work, which is great. I think we're going to see a big change when some of these organizations start supporting them in this work. But, I think for us, we've seen a lot more student athletes and current athletes taking advantage of things we're putting together versus just those that are already out trying to figure it out on the fly. So I think that's the big change we've been seeing. That, again, it's never too early to start preparing, and the earlier you do, the better off you're going to be.
I feel like too, Danielle, it's interesting because I remember growing up and watching Tattoo and things like that, and really the only conversations I ever heard about them were about things that they did on the field or on the ice. I'm a big hockey fan and things like that, and now I feel like we're really celebrating athletes that have found a way to sort of expand and do different things. I hear more about LeBron James's other ventures that he does outside. Steph Curry. I mean, insert person here. I think basketball has done a really celebrating that fact, and which is why those come to mind. But has that mindset shift, do you think, sort of paved the way for something like Tackle What's Next to really grow in this space? Players that these folks look up to, whether it be at college or professional level, are the ones who have found ways to effectively expand into different markets and different places outside of just what they can do.
Yeah, I think it's made a huge difference. one of the big things we focus on is storytelling. This is why we have our content. This is why we have our events, because you have to see someone in your position, in your shoes, in your situation achieve those things to really be able to grasp sometimes that you can also. And I think, we could talk about mental health, we could talk about investing, we could talk about building businesses, entrepreneurship. Those guys like LeBron, Steph, Kevin Love on the mental health side, Serena Williams, Naomi Osaka, like they are paving the way for the next generation to be able to say, well, no, I don't have to do this. I can spend doing this. I can invest. I can build businesses. I can do all these other things. And they're almost making it cool to do so, which is fantastic because, I think if we look 20, 30 years ago, like you said, Reed, like we didn't know anything about athletes other than their stat lines and what they did on and off the court or the field. Now we're like seeing them in Forbes, and we're seeing them in, all of these different venues. We're seeing them make, like in Entrepreneur Magazine and all of these things, like they're being interviewed for their business prowess and their investing and their new businesses and their advocacy. I mean, look at the WNBA, like no one really follows them because they're amazing basketball players as much as they are amazing advocates, right? There's that tie-in that they are more than just the sport that they play. And I think younger people clearly care about that, which I think is amazing. But I think at the same time, athletes now are realizing like they have that freedom to kind of explore who they are. Not to say they're all going to feel inclined to do that right now, but I think that tide is slowly changing. And I think, Reed, you brought up a great point. Like without these big named athletes, like paving the way and really putting their own brand and business out there, their own situation out there, they've kind of made it possible for other athletes to feel like they can do the same thing. I don't think you have this conversation without the work of more than an athlete, and LeBron James and Steph Curry and Serena Williams, like all of these people. Like I just don't think it has the visibility that it does without them. And they're rare examples, right? No one's going to be them, but they can do something in their own world, in their own community, in their own life, because those folks are kind of paving the way in like the whole broad media landscape of sports. So it's a great point. I think it's on the nose for sure.
Yeah, well, I love the point you made too about the fact that they're making it cool, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. I mean, sports as a culture and as a society sort of stems off of that, right? We live off of highlights, we live off of those amazing sort of 10-second moments that you can see in different things. And so when you can bring that same mindset to this piece of the puzzle, it makes it a lot easier to meet sports people sort of in that realm and have that conversation. And I would imagine, we sit on our side with college kids and high school kids. Did you almost have to work backward, really tackle what's next, and sort of approach folks who are in and sort of in that post-playing career phase that go, oh, I know exactly what you're doing, and I want to help because I see the benefits of this, versus active athletes and active folks? I feel like for them to see you almost have to get the backing of those folks that have been there and done that and can speak to the validity of what you're trying to teach them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really the reason why most of our speakers at events, most of the content we do is around athletes that have either built something incredible outside of the game while they're still playing, or those that have moved on and they've already kind of had these conversations and faced these challenges. And again, they might not be done. I don't think you're ever done transitioning, but I think they've moved to a point where they're more comfortable and they can talk about it and kind of look at it in the rear view of what they've done. And I think that's 100%. When we started, we were having conversations with former players and what did you do and what worked and what didn't and what support do you still need. And now we're really still supporting those folks, still engaging and including those folks, but we've seen our audience shift too to current and recently retired, college graduate athletes, right? Student athletes that are like, all right, I graduated, now what am I going to do? We've seen kind of that shift of younger and younger people that have been to engage and wanting to have these conversations. And I think it is because you have to kind of start with those that see the value, which is those that have been through it without necessarily the resources or the support. And then you can say, okay, like, tell us about what this was like. Tell us why this is important. And those younger athletes can go, well, if this person who was in my shoes 5 years ago is saying this is important, maybe that's why I need to start paying attention. And so, it's strategic. As much as we also want to give athletes platforms to share their stories and talk about what they do, we know that by them versus me sharing the story, right, it's going to reach so many more people and actually motivate so many more people, because I wasn't in their shoes directly, right? I wasn't a college athlete, so I can't really say, oh, I was a student athlete and I played professionally and this is what helped me. I love sports, I played sports, but I'm more on the business side. And so for me, it's about how can I reach the most people and who are they going to relate to the most? Because we all know this is important, right? But just like any young person, they're not going to listen to teacher or mom or administrator. They're going to listen to like older teammate or mentor or idol. And so you kind of have to use that as like the barrier to entry, is like, let's get somebody who's been through this to have that conversation. So it's 100% what we've done is kind of worked backwards. But I think that's the challenge, is like there's different support needed in these different spaces. And, it's hard to get somebody to invest in themselves 10 years from now. And that's a tough challenge, to get a college student or a 25-year-old, to say like, hey, put the time in now. When you're 35, you're going to really be thankful you did this. Like, don't go to that party, get on LinkedIn and connect with people, or go to a coffee meeting. They're going to be like, no, I don't want to do that. So it's balance. It's about talking to them, meeting them where they are at the same time, so it's a challenge, but it's one I hope that we're like slowly breaking down.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I so appreciate too that you guys you diversify the folks that talk on the panels, which I like so much. I think in sports especially, it can feel narrow laned as far as what people are doing. They're coaching, they're consulting, it all kind of falls into the same bucket. And you guys find folks from all over different industries, all over different, and again, just proves to the fact that hey, you can take this sort of ethos that you have, you can take this work ethic you can have, and you can apply it to so many different parts of who you want to be or where you want to go and find success. It's not you have to pigeonhole yourself. You got to do the work to be able to move into those different places. But look at all of people who have succeeded across the grain of all different places, all different backgrounds. It's really fun to see where those people come from. You're doing it. It makes for a really sort of vibrant and engaging conference, panel, workshop, whatever it might be.
And it's about showing people the opportunities, right? I think it's hard to know what is out there, especially, and Reed, we talked about this the other day, like you have to kind of stick to a script in a way. If you're pursuing a high level athletic career, you can't necessarily explore all these industries that you'd love to do, but it takes 60 hours of coursework a week, right? That's not going to fit into your schedule. And I think there's this whole other world that opens up when you're leaving sports around all these things you may have been interested in as a younger person that you just had to put on the back burner. Like, if you can keep those interests going while you're in college and playing professionally, if you make it there, you can open up those networks when you're ready to be like, all right, well, now I want to explore this again. I've always been passionate about medicine or science or technology or whatever it is, photography, whatever, it's that's still there. And so I think that's the goal for us, is we want diverse like opportunities out there, not just diverse people, but diverse opportunities, diverse sports, diverse representation, because every athlete is unique and they all have different interests, thoughts, backgrounds, experiences. And for us, there's no one way to do it. I think that's the key, is like, it's an individual transition. Read, your transition's different from somebody else's, right? I think that's the one thing, is yeah, there's commonalities, but you can't just be like, well, coaching and broadcasting and that's it, right? That's not for everybody. And I think that's natural. It's just a normal thing. Athletes are very diverse, interests, perspectives, thoughts, wants, needs. And I think that's the other thing, is we try not to categorize like athlete, like this is our target audience, athlete. We're like, okay, woman, man, are they interested in this? Are they interested in this? What was their background? What kind of interests do they have? Are they interested in mental health, entrepreneurship? Like, we really try to break it down and find those different categories, and at the same time understand that like a lot of people just don't know what they want. So if you can just expose them to a lot of things, see what they latch onto, and let them explore it, I think that's really our goal. We just want to be that starting point. You might come to 2 Tackle What's Next events ever, and then you go find something you want, and we never hear from you again, but hopefully we've directed you in a path that you just didn't know about and were able to pursue on your own. That's our goal.
Yeah. And there's, to kind of backtrack a little bit with, you mentioned how COVID changed everything, right? A lot of things went virtual. I feel like, a lot of people were looking at what the good things were that we got out of it, because who wants to kind of wallow in
Yeah.
the shut in of all of it, right? So with COVID happening, and you guys pivoting more to a digital virtual type space, did it change your approach of how you were helping these athletes or former athletes, and what was that pivot that you had to make?
Yeah, I think for us it was pretty easy and necessary pivot because we didn't never really did programming. We never really worked with athletes one on one. Our goal was to build a community and to have conversations. And so we were really planning on doing this big kind of tour, where we would go to different big events across the sports industry and host these conversations around career transition for athletes. And that was our goal. And we did two, and we had a big plan for 2020 to do three more. And our first pivot was we had planned an event in Atlanta for the Final Four that year, and we moved it virtual. And it was like, we found out March 13th or whatever it was, like everybody else, and got a call from the venue we were using being like, you guys are canceling this event, right? Because we're not having anybody on campus. We were like, yep, we're moving it virtual. And I think that's the one thing that we really had to realize is like, well, now we're doing virtual events. Like we're not changing our model. We're just changing the medium. And I think that's what a lot of people hopefully learned during this time is like, if your mission was strong enough, your mission didn't change. It's just the vehicle to get there changed. And so I think, that's when we really saw our audience start to change. And we had a lot of student athletes that seasons were canceled and were looking for things, current athletes that seasons were postponed or canceled that were like, well, I'll join this. What else do I have to do today? And so I think we just saw a lot more people kind of embrace that conversation. But for us, the pivot was pretty simple. I mean, we needed to go from an in-person event experience and networking and shaking hands and, clinking drinks to, virtual conversations. And, I had Zoom, I had done it before, but there's a lot that goes into a virtual event versus an in-person. So there were a lot of lessons learned. And, our summit was fantastic. We had a great turnout, our first virtual one, but I would say like it was very rudimentary, like very basic. Like it was just like panelists coming on, coming off, chatting, some Q&A. And I think now we've kind of started to evolve that because that's the benefit. Like you mentioned, there's good things about the virtual side. We saw our audience, instead of just being in DC and Florida and places that I knew, a lot of people were popping up in California and Minnesota and Texas, like all of these places. And we kind of saw like we kind of built this national audience so quickly because we were doing all of these virtual events that we could reach people at. And I think that was the big pivot for us, really saying like, yes, in person is great and necessary, and we'll hope to get back to that very soon when it makes sense. But you're very limited in who you can reach at an in-person event. And I think the virtual aspect that we pivoted to, we found is actually kind of a really nice way to reach people without kind of saying, oh, you have to fly here, you have to be here, you have to be in this area. And so I think that was a really basic pivot for us, but it really changed our direction from being just like doing in-person events and that's it, to really building out content and resources and a website and all of these things because everyone was online now. So that was the big pivot for us and really changed to what we're doing today, which is all virtual events and content. Again, hopefully some in-person ones down the road, but this is really what we do now.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating about, your original approach was, working backwards, as Reed pointed out, and, working with the alumni before working with the student. And, when I'm in different athletes, I always ask them about the academic part of things. And, the last interview I did, he was a former basketball player, and he said, I got to school and I didn't think that going to class was important. He said I had an 8 a.m. class and I never went. And my grades came out and they weren't very good. And I really had to turn things around. He said, and that's when I really started to focus on what was next after college. Is that something that you try to, as your demographic gets younger and you're working with, more students that are still in school, is that something that you try to remind them of? Is you are an athlete. You may have been recruited to come to this school and dribble a ball or, throw a ball, but you are here to be a student as well. And that's going to translate when you're done. Is that something that you try to make sure that you drill into these 18, 19, 20-year-olds as you're working with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation is a tough one, right? Because yes, they are student athletes at the end of the day, and again, a lot of schools like you don't go to class, you don't get your GPA up, like you're not playing. It's pretty simple. But I also do feel like there is this tough reality as to where, especially nowadays, I feel like there's so much pressure on young people, especially student athletes. And Reed, you could probably speak to this from your own experience, but like there's so much pressure to be that perfect athlete, that perfect student, to make sure everything's going well. I mean, imagine balancing social life, athletics, school, and like trying to make sure none of the balls are dropping. So, I think for us, the conversation that we really have is about more like giving yourself grace and just understanding that, like, you're never going to be perfect. You're not going to have a 4.0 most likely and be doing great in your, on the field or on the court and have this booming social life. Like you just, it's not realistic. And so I think the conversation we really have is, of course, you got to go to class, right? We want to prioritize the things that are important, but I think we also want to be a resource for them to really be able to focus on themselves, and so less about like, what's your major? What are you doing? And what job are you going to get? And all this stuff. They're just like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I haven't thought about this yet. We're just more like, what are you interested in? Like, has anyone ever asked you what you want to do when you leave? Like, do you ever want to explore that? I think those are the conversations we're trying to have. And, I think we could all probably bring up a ton of examples of the lack of support that student athletes get, and all of these stories we're seeing in the news today with, horrible, tragic deaths and suicides of student athletes because of this like lack of support or pressure or lack of, awareness of support, whatever it is. And so I think for us, like, we really just want to meet people where they are. And, I think that is great. And it also, it's harmful because at the same time, they do have to go to class. So we're trying to balance that conversation as best we can. I think the hard part is, there's so much pressure for them to be perfect, to be meeting all these marks. And I think sometimes, at least for me, sometimes it's nice to just have someone be like, it sucks, doesn't it? Isn't it so hard? Like, isn't it awful? Like, can we just talk about how terrible it is? Great. Like, you're going to be fine. Like, you know what? Just take a nap, like, I think that's the thing we want to give people, like, that grace to be like, I didn't go to that career fair. I was so tired. I have a test tomorrow. I just wanted to get to bed and like do my study hours and go to sleep. Like, no problem. You're not going to like fail career transition because you didn't go to that career fair. Like, take advantage of the resources, but like give yourself a break too. So it is so important. Like, class is a huge part of it. And I think for us, we're really trying to get student athletes, current pro athletes, former pro athletes, that conversation of like, just what do you need? Like, forget what your school needs, forget what your team needs, forget what your organization needs. Like, what about you? Like, when's the last time you, like, I don't know, meditated or took a yoga class or like went somewhere you really just wanted to go for fun? Like, I think that's where we're trying to meet people. And then we can kind of have that conversation too around, for those that are ready, around like, okay, like, how do I leverage this into a new opportunity? How do I find that next thing? So it's hard because there's a lot of conversations you need to be having with these young people, but at the same time, you can't, like, take this information and shove it in front of them without overwhelming them even more. So it's delicate balance. I don't know if I answered your question at all, but I think that's like the conversations we are having is a little bit less like forward around school and athletics and just trying to focus on them as an individual outside of it.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly answered the question, and
Okay, good.
it is a pattern, with athletes. And Reed and I were both athletes in college, and Reed was probably a better student than I was. I can remember not having a very good GPA because I didn't think class was as important. I came here to play football. That's what I'm
Hmm.
gonna go do, and I wasn't thinking about what's next. So, like, have you seen students kind of have a wake up call when you ask them, well, what do you like to do? And have they ever changed their major because you were the first person to ask them that question?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, for us, I don't necessarily work directly one on one with athletes, but I certainly talk to a lot of them. And, I was just talking to a friend of mine who happens to be a pro athlete right now playing internationally, and she's fantastic. And we were just having a brainstorming session because she was like, hey, I have this idea, and, I'm about to go to my next thing and play overseas. And I just wanted to bounce some ideas off of you and catch up. And so I think the conversations I have aren't necessarily like client to client, but more like, hey, Danielle, you have these conversations all the time. I just want to catch up. I want to hear how things are going. And I really have more friend to friend conversations and necessarily like, hey, you're my client. Let's talk about this transition. Um, so I will say, like, there are a lot of people that we've talked to that never have had that conversation. And so whether it's me talking to them individually on like a catch up call, or whether it's an event that we're doing, that we see these people in the audience, a lot of times we'll get feedback in a survey or in an email that says, like, this is the first time I've ever really had this conversation. Like, this is the first time that this was approached to anyone, like in front of me. And I think that the way that we try to do that is by having other athletes answer that question. Like, how did you figure out what you wanted to do? How do you know that you're like, how did you get where you are today? And so I think it is a huge issue. Like, there's not a lot of people talking to young athletes or athletes that are playing now in their 20s and 30s about, like, what about you? Like, sure, we know what your parents and your mom or your sister and your coach and your, agent, all these people, like, we know what they want. What do you want? What do you want to do? And it's a hard question, I think, for anyone, athlete or not, to like really sit down with themselves and be like, what do I want? But I think it's so important. And you brought up the mental side earlier. I mean, I think the reason we've really started having even more conversations around that is, before you can figure out your job and what you want and all these things, you really have to understand like your mental, who you are, your identity, your mental wellness, like, what do you need to be successful? And I think so many people haven't had that space and time to really explore that a lot of the conversations that we have with teams and associations about putting conversations together too, because we do a lot of that, is about, like, don't just talk to them about jobs. Like, that's great, they know they need a job eventually, right? Like, that's the obvious part. But like, give them the ownership in this, like, make them do the digging into who they are and what they want. And then you can talk about all the great services you offer and your career fair and all of these things. Like, don't just throw that on them day one and be like, okay, here's all the resources, like, go crazy, unless you've given them the space to be like, well, what am I going to do with this? Like, it's funny, like, whether it's a professional association or a school, like D3, D2, D1, whatever, like, there's not a lot of resources of someone that's just been like, here's what the transition's gonna be like. Like, here's what it's gonna be. It's gonna be challenging. You're gonna have no idea what you want to do. So let's unpack this now and start to think about these things. And at the same time, like, here's all the resources we have to help, but you have to give them ownership in that. And if they don't feel ownership, like they have control over all of these things going on, they're not going to show up. They're not going to participate because they're going to be overwhelmed. Like you were just saying, like, you're going to be like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be here to play sports. Why am I worried about all this stuff? So it's tough, but I think the more you can make that person involved and feel invested in it, that's where you get that engagement. Because if you come to me and you say, Danielle, what do you want to do? And I'm like, oh, I'm interested in real estate. I've always wanted to invest. Like, that seems really cool to me. Then when I go into the resources that you're sending out to me on a listserv and I see there's like a real estate investment thing, I'm like, oh, they're listening to me. Like, I want to go to that. That sounds cool. Like, you kind of have to give them that space to explore what they want, versus being like, here's 16 events that we're doing, here's 100 webinars we're doing, you have no idea why, you have no idea if you need it, right? I think there's like a step that we're all missing in this process. And I'm sure, Reed, for you, when you're working with younger athletes, like going into school, it's all that same conversation too, of like, well, what do you actually want to do with your life, versus like, where do you want to play sports? Like, that's two different conversations and you'll probably get two different answers. I think for us, we see the same thing. If you're going to say, like, what job do you want? They're going to be like, oh, I don't know, marketing, cool, startup, like, I want to work somewhere cool. Versus if you say, like, well, what do you actually like want to do with your life? Then they're going to be like, oh, I want to make an impact, or I want to do this, so it's like totally two different things. How do you plug them together? But yeah, another long-winded answer, but I think there's, for us, it's less about the one-on-one client work. We don't really do that. We really are about big, broad conversations and then sharing those resources, and then helping teams and associations and schools kind of have those same conversations in house to reach as many people as possible with that message of like, you can do this. It's up to you. You have to invest in yourself a little bit, you know?
No, I love that answer, especially the 2 points you made about, one, the fact that because you're right, there's a baby step element to it, right? Of like, it's not, which isn't wrong, but you can't just hand somebody a full syllabus, or you can't hand someone a physics textbook and assume that you taught them physics. Like, that's just not how it works, right? And if it's the first time you're having that conversation, to think that you can start at that sort of at point C as a point, as a, it just isn't going to be helpful for anybody. You'll be frustrated. You don't feel like you're getting through anything. It's, you kind of have to find that healthy intro to break down that barrier and to reduce that tension in that area. So we totally get it on the high school side, and I know you guys, I'm sure, get it on that side as well. That I really enjoy that you brought up was the fact that, I think one of the biggest things y'all do, and one of the things that's shown through the summit that I listen to, is just idea that, thinking about anything other than sports is wrong. I used to get anxiety when I would try to think about, or feel guilt if I would start to think about things that weren't related to my sport. And it happened more and more in college as I started to get more interested in different things and kind of find other angles to explore. It was like I would shut that part of my brain down whenever it started to happen, because I felt like it was somehow detrimental to the side, or someone was going to find out that I wasn't thinking about that all the time. And it was just a wild mindset to have, but one that's so common amongst athletes, because we people's heads, the moment they decide they want to play something competitively. And I play on literally, it's called a sandlot baseball team. It's rec ball. I love it. And one of the guys that I play on that team with is a former college baseball player as well. He played one season out in Tennessee, and we were just having a conversation. I mentioned my own I had whenever I was going through my transition, athlete, mental health struggles, and career transitions, and kind of trying to re-identify myself and things. He was like, yeah, he's kind of quiet about it. And then about 30 minutes later, he came over to me and was like, hey, I just want to say I appreciate you saying that, because I've never felt like I could admit that to somebody. He's a couple years younger than me. He's like, I've never felt like I could admit that to you. You said it so comfortably. I had those same problems, and I had those same things that I was working through, and I didn't really know how to communicate that to somebody, because I felt like it was paint me in a certain light within my athlete community,
Yeah.
and I didn't know how to necessarily approach that conversation. So the fact that, you were able to say it as comfortably as you did helped me sort of break that on sort of mental block in my head. And I mean, I didn't do it with that intent, but just opening up that conversation, I got to see it in real time, within a month of what that impact can have else in that space. Or I'll be like, yeah, this is tough, and no one tells you about it. You're literally in the middle of actively trying to figure out what that transition is, and we've made in sports that you can't even think about it until you're too far gone to really do anything to prepare for it, which is such a backwards way to think about it.
Yeah, it's such a great point, and I'm glad that that happened to you, because I think the biggest thing we hear is, I wish I had heard this sooner. I wish that somebody had talked to me about this earlier. And even with the speakers that we bring in to do things, I mean, the first few events we had, like, people were just like, how can I participate? I want to share. I want to be a part of this because I know why it's so important. And it's just that sense that like people feel so alone in this, because exactly what you said, Reed, like for some reason in sports it's like the boogeyman. You cannot talk about the next chapter, or like bad things will happen to you. And it's so mind-blowing, because in every other career, if you aren't thinking about your next chapter, like you are not being ambitious enough. Like that is the goal, right? You think about any other career, like if you're in med school and you're not trying to be a doctor, like what are you doing? You know what I mean? So it's almost like you, like in sports we kind of are like, don't talk about the next thing, you're going to mess up what you have now. And it's so counterintuitive to like the rest of society, in terms of like we're all trying to get to the next thing, we're all like thinking about the future. And it really handicaps athletes, because they get out of sports and then they have to do all this work that they could have been doing alongside of their sport. And there's so many resources that you have when you're playing sports that you don't have when you leave the game, that you could be using to your advantage. And so I think we see that a lot. It's just like that little conversation can just spark something. And it doesn't have to be anything intentional or not. It could just be like, yeah, I struggled and it sucked and it was hard. And, that shows people that like, okay, maybe I do need to think about this. Like if they're struggling, maybe I will too. And it's not to say like everyone will. I'm sure there's people that were prepared and did the work right and had the right resources. And that's fantastic. But I think the big thing that we found is like the stories that we can tell through our platform, and it's not us, it's the athletes that are gracious enough to share their stories. That's where we see the most impact that we've made. It's not because we put on an amazing event, it's because our speakers shared such impactful information and someone was there to hear it and be like, that helped me. I mean, it's simple. Like we're not doing anything groundbreaking or different. We're just trying to bring people together to have these conversations just like you did, Reed, because I think that's where we're going to see change happen is when everybody starts to be like, I'm struggling. This is hard. I need help. And I think for athletes, that's a stigma that they're told never to do. Figure it out, get there, figure it out, do the next thing, keep going, get back up. And that's not a bad skill to have unless you're struggling, because then you're not going to be able to ask for help as much as you should be. So I'm glad you said that, because it's really that simple. Just that conversation can really like open somebody up to being like, maybe I need to think about my life differently. And that's sometimes all it takes for someone to be like, maybe I should call that person I met one time about what they do for a living, or maybe I should call that person that mentioned if I ever needed, a therapy session. Like maybe I do need support, and it's okay to ask for it. I think those things are important to, especially for athletes. I mean, just to emphasize, it's okay. It's fine. Everybody's doing it. They might not be talking about it, but they needed to do it eventually. So I think that's amazing that you had that experience.
Yeah, I think we've really there's in my mind, I've really changed my definition of what mental toughness is, especially in the context of being an athlete, and that has a lot to do with it. Just being comfortable with sort of knowing where your strengths are, knowing where your weaknesses are. You need to ask for a little bit of help, and that's just kind of part of that whole process. And like you said, everybody else, you're literally taught to do that. And here, for some reason, we go that entire point. So I feel like tackle what's in institutions like it. It's almost sort of the next evolution or next phase of what, in my opinion, kind of the Players Tribune sort of started, in the sense of like that was the first time that I ever felt like I was hearing something from a player's mouth, and I could not get enough of it. I could not
Mhm.
read enough of those articles. I couldn't get more of that. And in that conversation, that I would argue 95% of folks in this athlete community experience in one form or another, but we've all just decided those are off topics until they're not. I mean, it's cool to see that open up and to sort of widen the gap as far as, or sorry, close the gap as far as those conversations are concerned. But I am kind of curious, just in your, obviously you've been a part of a lot of the Tackle What's Next summits, events, things like that. Have seen a lot of folks, heard a lot of things. Is like a favorite tip, I guess you could say, a favorite tip or a favorite or anecdote that somebody said where it was kind of this click moment for you of like, oh man, like that's the way to think about that. Sort of shift your brain or shift your habits, as you move into being a sort of a athlete who successfully transitions into a career path.
Yeah, it's a great question. There's probably so many, and we only have a limited amount of time. So I'll pick one that I feel like ties everything together. I think a few of our speakers in the past have mentioned this, and it's probably been said by each of them in some way, shape, or form. But sports is using you, and you need to use sport as much as it's using you. And when someone said that, or three people said variations of that, I was like, that's it. I mean, that's what this is about, right? Is think of what sport is getting from you. And sport is your team, your school, your professional team, your industry, the sport you play, like the people in the front office, like they're there because you're there. And I think that's something that I don't think a lot of athletes understand, the power that they do have. And I think that's changed a lot. I think now, like you're saying, with the Players Tribune and just the advocacy and like the conversations athletes are having today, they're starting to realize like, oh, we're here. And that's why all these other people are here. That's why this is a billion-dollar industry, is because of us. Like we're putting in the blood, the sweat, the tears, and they're making all of this money too. And so I think that idea of like using sport as much as it's using you is something that I think clicked for me, and I hope clicked for people listening to those conversations, because it is about being selfish, which you're not supposed to do as an athlete either. You're supposed to be a team player, right? You're not supposed to like be the ball hog, right? You're supposed to share, and you're supposed to support, and you're supposed to take a step back and all of these kinds of things. But you need to be selfish, because this is about you, and no one's going to advocate more for you than you will. I mean, I say this all the time, like I can't want this more than you. And so I feel like that's the other thing is you got to use sport as much as it's using you, and you need to find that ownership in it, because until you do, things will be happening to you instead of you making things happen. And I think that's a big difference too. It's like, it's all about that story of what you're telling yourself, like, oh, this everything's terrible, like nothing's going right for me, versus like I have the support I need. I'm able to find these things. I've done the work. I'm putting in the effort every day to get better individually, personally, whatever it is. It's a difference, but it's, again, like there's just so much good advice, but it's work. It's taking what sport's giving you and using it for your own advantage. And that's, again, antithetical to what sports is about. It's not about being selfish, but it is for you individually as an athlete. Like you have to be. That's the way you succeed, and it's about prioritizing yourself over everything else. And I think we've seen a lot of bigger names start that, and people have freaked out about it a little bit. But at the same time, despite people freaking out about it a little bit, I think it's just been very clear to other athletes, like, maybe this isn't the most important thing ever. Like, maybe I'm more important than my sport. And I think hopefully that's a mentality we can like keep pushing with, because yeah, sport is making a lot of money off of you. The least you can do is like let it get you to your next spot,
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's pretty spot on of how things have really started to transition with branding and people taking ownership of their own personalities, and just trying to fight back against the noise of people telling them that they're just athletes, right? And I think that's a major part of it. And a lot of athletes, myself included, have to fight through that imposter syndrome, right? Of, should I be here? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And now that I'm in something that I like, am I qualified enough to do it? So, you know, I'm glad that people like you exist, that you can kind of shepherd these athletes through that transition period, and keep going, with a lot of these different tips and tricks that you've had, and all these different stories you have at these summits. So I really appreciate it. I'm really happy that you joined us today. I have 0 questions left for you, just a lot of knowledge that I'm going to be taking with me. So thank you for joining us. Reed, do you have anything else for Danielle?
Danielle, if you could just tell folks, best way to find you guys in order to access, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you guys so much. These are my favorite conversations to have with people that are like-minded and want the same things and want to make the same change. So thanks again for having me and for letting me ramble on here for so long. But no, I mean, you can find us everywhere. Tackle What's Next. So on social media, pretty much any channel. One of our interns is building out a TikTok for us right now, so that's a new chapter we're diving into. Good luck to him teaching me how to use that. But like that's a new channel. But social, all on Tackle What's Next, just at Tackle What's Next, and then our website has links to events we have coming up. We share a lot on social, but we have a newsletter you can sign up for every week that comes out. We want to share stories and things that people are doing off the field, off the court. So happy to connect as well. You can reach out to me on our website too. My email's on there and we can chat. But yeah, thank you guys for having me, and happy to share anytime what you guys are doing too. This is awesome.
That's great.
It was a blast,
sure
Danielle.
Anyone listening has to go over and check out Tackle What's Next.
Yeah, please do. We'd love to have you.
Thanks.
No, thank you guys. This was so much fun.